Baraka was an Abyssinian slave who protected Muhammad during the death of his mother and father. She was raised by the parents of Muhammad as a slave doing their duties. And so, when their parents died, she became Muhammad's property. She is known by a lot of names, but one of the ones that Muhammad gave her was my mother after my mother, because she raised, and in raising him she was one of his first followers. She was told by the grandfather of Muhammad not to leave his side, and so that's what she did, especially since it had been predicted that he would be the prophet of the nation. She was constantly at the side of Muhammad, and when Muhammad was 7 years old, she 100% had responsibility for him. But when Muhammad grew up and married Khadija, she was set free by Muhammad, and so she was no longer charged as a slave, but yet refused to leave his side, even refusing to marry. But of course, Muhammad said that she's not getting any younger and it's important for her to get married. And so Muhammad found a suitor and she married him. The suitor later died and she remarried. Interestingly, she married Muhammad's adopted son, Zayd ibn Haritha, who, by the way, was way younger than her. And the reason why this man married her is because Muhammad said, to know Baraka is to know heaven. And of course, Zayd ibn Haritha wanted to know heaven, so why wouldn't he marry her? All of that information already makes her part of a legendary story, but what really made her legendary is that she was present at the Battle of Uhud, where she fetched water for the soldiers and helped treat their injuries, acting as a full woman and taking care of them. But in the Battle of Uhud, when things were going bad, many of the men who were in Muhammad's army ran away because they thought that Muhammad was dead. Ayman, who was tasked with being by the side of Muhammad at all times, took a sword and ran towards the battlefield with several women to go fight the enemy. Though she was injured, she did not die there. In fact, she outlived Muhammad by several years, only dying later during the caliphate of Abu Bakr. This shows that Ethiopians and other Africans have always been intertwined with the history of the Middle East, even though we did not need to go to Islam, because Islam is one of the later empires in which you see Abyssinians. Abyssinians have always been present in the Middle East, and some of the earliest evidence comes from people like Xerxes, who depict Abyssinians in his empire, and in fact, he calls them one of the strongest parts of his army. If we take all of this information and we drive it in a non religious direction to talk about how some black people were treated in that area, starting, of course, with slaves and then free men, what we see is the stereotype of the wretched African is something that was built later, not before Islam. This woman is mentioned in many hadiths, and she is mentioned by other historical accounts, making her reality quite real. In the future, lots of other Ethiopians were mentioned as well as non Ethiopians. And so the story unfolds that Islam, you don't get Islam without an Ethiopian woman.